Good Tuesday morning, everybody. It is Alistair, aka that pesky social worker, coming to you for now the eighth time. Uh, Inside, as you can tell, I tried to shoot it on the walk 3 different times, and it just didn't. I didn't like anything I was saying. It's been a difficult morning. So I'm just gonna jump right into what I want to talk about. So last night I started reading a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And this is a book that's been pivotal for a lot of people who do sort of influency thought stuff. And it's the root, I think. This is just sort of me armchairing it. I will totally own that. I think this is where a lot of people who are in the more influential space that are getting, kickback. I think I know where their ideology of pushing towards the next thing came from, and I also resonate with that. So that's not me shaming that group of people. So Man's Search for Meaning is a first-person account of a Holocaust survivor. Now, this is not the same thing as Elie Wiesel's Night, which is a very personal account. Viktor Frankl's account, it has vignettes of his stay when he was in Auschwitz and some of the other concentration camps, because he did move. But he talks about that experience in terms of from a psychological perspective, because when he went into the concentration camp, he was a psychiatrist, he was a doctor, and to take somebody who's a mental health professional and shove them into one of the most, if not like the single most traumatizing collective event in history, and have them analyze why some people survived that situation and why some people didn't, is really invaluable. Now, this isn't going to work for everyone, and that's always what I want to emphasize with all of this stuff. There is not a one-size-fits-all. There's a reason why when you come into this kind of space, they tell you to, like, pick a niche. And really, it's self-sorting. People who resonate with, the things that you have to say in your ideology will come, hang out, stick around. The people who don't are either going to leave you a bunch of hate, unsubscribe, do both, or just not come around. Like, it's kind of self-sorting. And today's video touches on, I should say, something I talked about a few days ago. And that is sort of the false dichotomy we've fallen into around coping in this country right now, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of you have people who are in personal development and professional development and coaches and some therapists that are, in the eyes of some people, pushing productivity and sort of ignoring the fact that this is something that's traumatizing. And there are people who are really, really urging us to be really gentle, to, in some ways, I hate to say it, enable maladaptive coping skills. I will be the first person to say that I engage in Netflix and numb. And what that means is that there are days where, like, on the weekends, if it's been a really bad week, you betcha, I'll spend 5 to 8 hours parked in front of my TV watching Golden Girls for like hours straight. That's what my neighbors have to hear through the wall. Like, I will own that that's something that I do. So I don't want you to have the impression that those of us that are, trying to encourage the idea of thinking forward aren't also having a hard time with this. It's not an either or. It's not you're either 100%, productive, you're on your hustle, you're doing so much and making so many gains, learn a new skill set, or, you're a bump on a log and you're doing nothing. I also want to flag that there's been the discussion that, if you're 2 or 3 months into this pandemic and you're still not coping, I guess, however people want to frame that, and if there have been some people that have said, if you're still on the couch, if you're still not being productive, if you're still in your maladaptive coping skills, then you have a mental health issue. That's a really charged statement that's been made by a couple of people that have worked and talk about having worked with mental health professionals, but they themselves are not. And that's something that I will get to tomorrow. Today, bringing it back, I want to talk about the concept of choice. And that is not a popular topic right now because, again, going back to that debate, people think that people who are advocating, and I put the word shame in quotes because that's a subjective, it depends on how that hits you and your emotional reality, that feel like they're being shamed because they're not being productive, they're not working, they're not doing all of this other stuff. And in Man's Search for Meaning, there's a passage that really, really struck me, that made this crystal for me, because Until I got to where I am in my healing journey, I was also one of those people. When something bad happened and somebody told me that I needed to reevaluate how I was thinking about it, or I needed to approach it from a different angle, I was like, I would get super defensive because I was in an emotionally reactive place, and I would say, screw you. How dare you tell me how to deal with what I've been through? You don't understand anything that I've experienced. You don't understand my life. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know my pain. You're right. I don't understand or know any of those things because I'm not you. And as I've said in previous, videos, you are the expert of your experience. Okay? Nobody can take that away from you. However, I've also been in my own iterations of my own personal hell that I've had to live through. Injustices that I have had to live through, abuses I have had to live through, like trauma I have had to live through. And that's where I'm speaking from, is for me and what I have learned. If this resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. There's a scene that I was reading last night in Man's Search for Meaning, like I said, that really crystallized the concept of choice. Because Viktor Frankl talks about, regardless of the situation that you're in and regardless of how much is taken away from you, you still have the choice in how you respond, how you choose to respond to that situation. He talks about how he had gone through the selection process, and if any of you remember your World War II history, there was the left and the right. You get to the camp, you go to the left. That meant you were going usually to the gas chambers. Go to the right, you go to work until you can't work anymore and you get sick and die of typhus, or they send you to the gas chamber. So Victor has been sent to the right, and he now knows that he's going to be working, and he goes through the processing where, they basically strip them down naked of everything they own. They take all their clothes, they shave them completely naked, and then they put them in a shower. And Victor talks about this moment, and this really, like I said, it crystallized it for me. He talks about this moment where he realizes that there's another set of showers where what comes out of the shower head isn't water. And he finds himself, even though he's literally just been shaved, completely hairless, had all of his possessions taken from him except for his shoes and his belt, and he's standing naked in front of a group of strangers in a shower. And realizing that he's living in a concentration camp. All of that is happening at one time. All of this is happening in Victor's reality. And instead of falling into this immediate level of despair, he thinks to himself, there's water coming out of the tap. And to reframe that even more, what I used to say in group therapy to my kids when I was still a group clinician, which is what I did before home health and hospice, is that sometimes your silver linings are aluminum foil. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the silver lining isn't really silver. If you think about when I was in first grade, American public school is notorious for making all kinds of wonderful crafts around the holidays to send home to parents to pretend to love or to actually cherish. And one of those was when in first grade I made a little silver star that my mother still puts on top of the fucking Christmas tree, which you see my Christmas tree is still up. Don't judge me. I'm trying to keep the spirit. I'm also lazy. I cut this star out of cardboard, and then to make it silver, we had to cover it in aluminum foil. And when I was working with my kids who have been in these really traumatizing situations, who come from abusive households, who have suffered assault, who have been through the ringer by the age of 12, 13, 14, kids who have seen stuff that, like, people twice their age haven't experienced. I can't sit there and tell them, use this as a motivator. Like, this is so, like, bad things happen, and that deserves to be honored. It's not always possible to spin negative things positively. It's really not. And that's when it comes to that aluminum foil being your silver lining. Sometimes the blessing in the situation is that you survived. Sometimes the blessing is that you made it out. Sometimes the blessing is that you didn't turn into, your sibling or your former partner or your parent or whoever it was that was causing the damage. Sometimes the blessing, sometimes the silver lining is that you just got through it, that you survived. The reality is that there's not always going to be profundity attached to everything that you go through, but you get to choose what it means to you. So the takeaway today is that agency is a real thing. Choice is a real thing. And it's so hard to make that choice sometimes. And if you want to have a dialogue about how we make those choices, please feel free to reach out. But I want to encourage people that even if it feels like all of your choices have been taken away from you, how you respond is still under your control. So not all hope is lost. I hope everybody has a wonderful Tuesday, and I will talk to you all tomorrow morning.